She warned him exactly what would happen if he did it again. He did it again. So she left. She came home after a long day of sitting in brutal traffic, dragging herself across the finish line just to get to the front door, and it was locked. Not unlocked by accident. Locked. On purpose. Well, not on purpose, but that almost makes it worse. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She just turned around, walked back to her car, and drove away. And honestly? Good for her. Because this was not the first time. This was not the second time. This had become a whole pattern, a recurring situation that she had already addressed, already warned him about, and already given him every opportunity to fix. And he kept doing it anyway. So let's back all the way up and talk about exactly what happened here, because there is a lot more to this story than just a locked door. Our narrator and her fiancé moved into a new apartment together a few months ago. They have what she describes as a genuinely wonderful relationship. Good communication, real affection, very little conflict. She is excited to marry this man. She goes out of her way to say that before getting into anything else, and you can tell she means it. You can feel the care behind those words, the way she wants anyone reading to understand that she is not writing about a villain. She is writing about someone she loves, someone she chose, someone she is still choosing. This is not a story about a bad relationship. This is a story about one very specific and very frustrating problem that kept happening again and again inside an otherwise solid partnership, and how she eventually decided to do something about it. The apartment has 2 locks on the front door. A bottom lock that you can lock from both inside and outside using a key, and a top lock that can only be locked from the inside. Her fiancé gets home about 45 minutes to an hour before she does every day. And at some point he developed this habit of coming home, walking through the door, dropping his bag, probably kicking off his shoes, and reaching up to lock the top lock instead of the bottom one. Just automatically. Without looking. Without thinking. Which means that when she gets home from her long commute through traffic, tired and hungry and ready to simply exist inside her own home, she cannot get in. There is no key in the world that opens that top lock from the outside. She has to stand there on the doorstep, bags in hand, and knock and wait for him to come let her in like she is a visitor in a place where her name is on the lease. Now the first couple of times this happened, she let it go. She believed it was genuinely accidental, and based on everything she knows about him, that was a completely reasonable conclusion. He is not the kind of person who would do this to be cruel or controlling. He is, by her own description, clingy and excited to see her every single day. He rushes to the door when he hears her knock. He apologizes profusely every single time, his face probably a little pink with embarrassment, genuinely mortified that he had done it again. There was nothing calculated in any of it. She could see that. So she gave him the benefit of the doubt. Multiple times. Okay, pause. I just need to say this out loud. He locks the door when he gets home and then he does not notice that his fiancée is not home yet? He walks in, locks the top lock, and just goes about his evening? That detail alone would drive me absolutely insane. But here is where it starts to become a real issue. Despite her expressing how frustrated she was, despite his apologies and his promises to pay more attention, he would do better for a couple of days and then go right back to locking the wrong one. Over and over again. She would come home after a long commute, already stressed, already exhausted, already in a mood where she just needed to sit down and decompress, and the door would be locked. And she would have to stand outside in the hallway and knock and wait. And while she waited she would have to talk herself down, remind herself that he was not doing this to her, remind herself that it was an accident, remind herself that the man on the other side of that door was someone she loved and not someone she wanted to be furious at. Every single time she had to remind herself that he did not mean it. Every single time she swallowed the frustration and moved on. But frustration that gets swallowed does not disappear. It accumulates. At some point, a person runs out of patience for something that keeps happening. And that is exactly what occurred. She sat him down and told him directly, clearly, and without any dramatic escalation, that if it happened again she was not coming inside. She would find somewhere else to stay for the night. He did not love hearing that. It probably stung a little to hear it framed as a consequence, as an ultimatum of sorts, because ultimatums have a weight to them even when they are delivered calmly. He probably felt defensive, maybe even a little hurt, because he knew he had not been doing it on purpose and it can feel unfair to be held accountable for something accidental. But she was not being dramatic. She was telling him the truth about what she planned to do, giving him one final and very clear warning that the pattern needed to stop. She was not asking anymore. She was informing. He promised again. He assured her again. Things were a little tense between them for a bit after that conversation, a little icy, the kind of quiet that settles over a home when two people are trying to get back to normal after a difficult exchange. There is a particular kind of silence that follows a hard conversation, where both people are being careful with each other, choosing words slowly, stepping lightly. That was probably the atmosphere in their apartment for a day or two. But they worked through it and got back to normal. And she probably exhaled just a little bit, sitting with a cautious, fragile hope that this time the message had finally landed. That this time he would walk through that door and his hand would go to the bottom lock, not the top one. That this time she would put her key in and the door would just open. He did not remember. She pulled up to the apartment the very next evening. Same commute. Same tired shoulders, same aching feet, same readiness to just be home. She walked up to the door, put her key in, and felt the resistance. Locked. The top lock. Again. And something in her just settled into a kind of quiet resolution, because she had already made her decision. She had made it days ago. She did not knock. She did not press her ear to the door and try to hear if he was nearby. She did not give him the chance to come rushing down the hallway with another round of apologies and that slightly panicked look on his face. She had already told him what would happen. She had already made herself completely clear. So she turned around, walked back down to her car, drove to Walmart to pick up a few things she would need for the night, and then she found a hotel and booked herself a room. And then she stayed there. She put her bag down, took off her shoes in a room that was entirely quiet, and she stayed. I genuinely respect this so much. She said a thing and then she did the thing. That is rare. He called within 10 minutes. Apologizing again, voice probably tight and urgent, begging her to come back, explaining that he had not meant to, that he was so sorry, that she did not need to do this. And she told him calmly that she had warned him, that she was not coming back until tomorrow, and then she ended the call. He texted her all evening. A steady stream of messages, apologies stacking up on her screen one after another, each one a little more desperate than the last. She did not respond to any of it. She muted the notifications, set her phone face down on the nightstand, and she stayed in her hotel room. She probably watched something mindless on television, ordered food, let herself breathe. And she held the line. Now here is the thing that I think is really important to understand about what she did. She was not punishing him for the sake of being cruel. She was not trying to scare him or manipulate him into behaving differently through some kind of calculated emotional move. She made a very specific, very clear statement about a boundary she had, and then when that boundary was crossed, she followed through on exactly what she said she would do. That is not a threat. That is just communication. She said what she meant and she meant what she said. And think about what happens to trust and communication in a relationship when someone consistently does not follow through on what they say. If she had made that warning and then come home anyway, knocked on the door, and let him apologize his way out of it again, what would that have taught him? It would have taught him that her words do not have real consequences. That he can keep doing the thing and she will keep accepting the apology and life will continue without any real change. The only reason that warning meant anything at all was because she was actually willing to act on it. Her willingness to be uncomfortable for one night is what gave every word she had said any weight at all. She also, to her credit, did not blow this up into something bigger than it was. She did not break up with him over it. She did not tell him she was reconsidering the engagement. She did not deliver a long speech about respect or what this pattern said about him as a person. She kept the consequence tightly matched to the offense. One night. One hotel room. One clear, proportionate response to one clear, repeated problem. She came back the next day and moved on without rubbing it in, without making him feel like a terrible person, without dragging it out longer than it needed to go. She held her boundary in proportion to the actual offense. She was not dramatic. She was consistent. Now let us talk about the solution they landed on, because I think this is actually the best part of the whole story. She suggested putting a sticky note over the top lock so that using it would require an intentional conscious choice rather than a reflexive habit. Just a small square of paper, something bright and impossible to miss, positioned exactly where his hand would land when he reached up out of muscle memory. He was fully on board with no pushback at all. And his explanation for why he kept doing it actually makes sense in a frustrating kind of way. He walks in, blindly reaches for the door without looking, grabs the first lock he feels, and since both locks make the same clicking sound when they turn, he has no idea which one he has just locked. His hand goes to the top one out of pure habit and he genuinely does not register that anything is wrong. To him it probably feels exactly the same as doing it correctly. She side-eyed him a little bit for that explanation, and honestly I understand why, because there is something a little absurd about the idea that a grown adult can lock a door and not even notice what they are doing. But habits are real, muscle memory is real, and people genuinely do autopilot through certain actions dozens of times a day without any conscious awareness at all. Think about driving a familiar route and realizing you cannot remember any of it. Think about brushing your teeth and not being able to recall which side you started on. The brain conserves energy by automating the familiar. I believe him. I think it was never malicious. I think it was just a deeply entrenched and deeply inconvenient habit that required a real physical reminder to interrupt it. Here is where the verdict lands for me, and I want to be clear about it. She is not the problem here. She is not the one who needs to explain herself. She gave him every possible opportunity to fix a pattern that was making her daily life worse. She communicated exactly what she planned to do, and then when he did it again, she did exactly what she said. That is called follow-through, and it is one of the most important things in any relationship. Without it, words are just noise. He is a good person who has a bad habit, and those two things can both be true at the same time. She is not wrong for being frustrated with him. She is not wrong for drawing a line. She is not wrong for staying at a hotel. And she is especially not wrong for coming back the next day and working toward a real solution instead of turning this into a catastrophe. She handled this with exactly the right amount of firmness and exactly the right amount of grace. If you follow through on your word once, clearly and without cruelty, the message lands in a way that 100 apologies never could. She did not need to yell. She did not need to threaten to leave the relationship. She just needed one quiet, firm night in a hotel room. And based on that sticky note solution and the fact that he had zero pushback about it, I think it worked. She was not the unreasonable one. She was the one who finally made the message stick. They hijacked our private flight plan for their own wedding and then had the nerve to demand we pay for 2 trips. Someone just called their own in-laws sneaky while in the same breath admitting those in-laws scheduled an entire wedding around a private plane they did not pay for. And he is somehow still questioning whether he is the problem. Let me walk you through this one carefully because there are layers here that deserve a real breakdown. Our narrator and his wife are in their early 60s. They are completely no contact with his wife's 3 sisters. Not because of a petty falling out or an old grudge nobody even remembers anymore. Because of $25,000 that was taken and never returned. Because one of the sisters trashed their condo after they were gracious enough to let her stay there while she got back on her feet. Because these women have lied, stolen, cheated, and said hateful things directly to their children over the years. This is not a complicated situation in terms of who the difficult people are. That part is crystal clear. And yet, in spite of all of that, these two have kept moving forward, kept living their lives, kept their peace intact, which is its own quiet achievement when you consider the weight of what was done to them. Their daughter, 33 years old and about to get married, wants her grandparents at her wedding more than almost anything. The grandparents are in their mid-90s, in Florida, in failing health, and the wedding is in the New York area. Commercial flights are not an option for people in that condition. The noise, the crowds, the delays, the physical toll of navigating an airport in a wheelchair, all of it would be too much. Driving is obviously not an option either. This looked, for a while, like a situation where the grandparents might genuinely have to miss the wedding of a granddaughter who was named after her grandmother. That is heartbreaking. Genuinely heartbreaking. The kind of loss that quietly sits with a family forever, the empty chairs in the photographs, the absence that everyone tries not to mention but that everyone feels. So he and his brother-in-law, the son of these same parents, pooled their resources and their connections and found a way to make it happen. They arranged a private flight through a contact in aviation, flying the grandparents from Florida to Teterboro, leaving them in New York for 2 weeks so they could spend time in the city where they grew up and attend the wedding, and then flying them home the day after. Think about the coordination that required. The calls, the favors, the logistics of moving two people in their mid-90s across state lines in a way that kept them comfortable and safe and cared for. The joy that this plan brought to everyone involved was real and it was earned. You could picture it, the granddaughter finding out, the tears, the disbelief, the gratitude that has no clean words attached to it. This was an act of love. A genuinely generous, thoughtful, coordinated act of love for people who might not have many more chances at moments like this. And then the sisters found out. Oh, this is where it gets ugly. Because those 3 sisters have a son, a nephew of the bride, who is also getting married this summer. And after learning about the private flight plan, after finding out that Grandma and Grandpa were going to be in New York for 2 weeks starting right after the 4th of July, they scheduled that nephew's wedding for the Saturday before the original wedding date. July 11th. 1 week before July 18th. Read that back to yourself slowly. They looked at a plan that someone else made and funded, a plan rooted in love for dying grandparents, and they said, how do we also benefit from this? They did not call to say congratulations. They did not reach out to thank anyone. They just quietly looked at the calendar, saw an opportunity that someone else created, and slotted themselves right into it without a single word of acknowledgement to the people who made it possible. I need a moment. They scheduled a wedding. Around someone else's private plane. That someone else is paying for. I cannot. Now here is where the real chaos kicks in, because life has a sense of humor that nobody asked for. The venue for the daughter's wedding had to close for a week in June due to infrastructure repairs, which pushed their entire booking schedule off. They offered the daughter a deal to move her date, and since both she and her fiancé are attorneys, they negotiated something that saved them nearly $12,000. They moved the wedding to an August date. A completely reasonable decision. A financially smart decision. 2 people who understand contracts and timing and long-term value made the exact choice any rational person would make in that situation. A decision that had absolutely nothing to do with the sisters or the nephew's wedding. But the moment the sisters found out, they lost their minds. They came out of no contact like it was nothing. Like the years of blocked numbers and closed doors had never happened. They called. They texted. They screamed. They accused him and his wife of ruining the nephew's wedding, of punishing the nephew for things that have nothing to do with him, and they demanded, with full seriousness, that he and his brother-in-law pay for a second private flight so that Grandma and Grandpa could attend both weddings. Say it out loud. A second private flight. Funded by the same people they stole $25,000 from. So that they could benefit from a connection they had no part in building, For a wedding date they chose entirely on their own terms, around a plan that was never theirs to begin with. He and his wife laughed out loud. And then they told the sisters exactly where to go. And then they blocked them again on every platform. And then the sisters sent proxy relatives, cousins and aunts and uncles, to continue the pressure campaign, saying that he was prioritizing money over family reconciliation and making things worse. Here is what I want to say to those proxy relatives. Mind your business. Genuinely. Mind it completely and entirely. Because here is what actually happened. The sisters saw a plan, a private and expensive and lovingly arranged plan, and they parasite onto it without asking, without contributing, without even acknowledging who made it possible. When the plan shifted for a completely unrelated reason, they acted as though they had been wronged. As though they had a right to that airplane. As though the people who are $25,000 in the hole because of them owed them anything at all. The audacity of that position is almost hard to put into words. These are women who took money, trashed a home, and cut a years-long trail of damage through this family, and they are standing there acting like victims. The sheer confidence of it. The complete and total lack of self-awareness required to make those phone calls and send those texts and recruit relatives to carry your water after everything that has happened. The one genuinely complicated piece of this is the grandparents themselves. He brings this up and it is the most human part of the whole story. Grandma and Grandpa are Switzerland. They are not part of the conflict. They just want to see their grandchildren get married. They are in their mid-90s and they are running out of opportunities to be present for the people they love, and every missed celebration is one they will not get back. And now, because of the date change, the logistics have shifted in a way that means they cannot attend both weddings on the original plan. That is sad. That is a real loss for everyone, including the nephew, who almost certainly had nothing to do with his parents scheduling their wedding around a plane they did not arrange. He is a young man who probably just wanted to get married and have his grandparents there, and his mother turned that wish into a weapon. But let us be honest about where the blame for that actually sits. The grandparents are not missing the nephew's wedding because of him. They are potentially missing it because their daughters, the nephew's own mother and aunts, made a selfish and manipulative decision to exploit a plan they did not create, and then threw a tantrum when that plan changed. The nephew is a victim of his own parents' behavior here, and that is genuinely unfortunate, but the solution to that is not to demand that someone else fund a second expensive flight to clean up the mess that those parents made. He owes them nothing. He has already done more than almost any person would be expected to do, arranging a private flight for elderly grandparents at real personal cost and effort, out of pure love for his daughter and his wife. The sisters took $25,000 from these people. They trashed their home. They lied and stole and hurt their children. And now they want a seat on a plane that this man helped pay for. The answer to that is no. It was always going to be no. And telling them to go take a hike, while perhaps not the most diplomatic phrasing, is exactly the right response. He is not the bad guy in this story. Not even a little. Drop a comment and let me know which story hit harder for you today. If you are still here, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss the next one.